what you need to do from here on, or this is the next step, or here's the action points. And so we'll talk about more later on how that works for coaching. But the fourth step is requesting action. What are they going to do based on the conversation you just had with them? And so, and a lot of that is because with coaching is focused on solutions. It's not focused on therapy. And that's kind of the difference between counseling and coaching. So when I teach coach training to groups, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll draw a diagram. It's a straight line. It's basically a top to bottom continuum. And I'll draw a line in the middle, and I'll say this is healthy. So if you imagine the continuum as an individual's life, and that middle line is a healthy individual, healthy spiritually, emotionally, a healthy person. Counseling is the lower half of that. A lot of times what counseling does is it helps people come into a place of health, of mental health, of even spiritual health, a place of that they can function as an individual, as an adult, in a healthy way. Coaching then steps in at that point, because most healthy people don't need counseling. They're not going to look for a counselor. They're not going to go to a psychologist or look for some sort of psychotherapy, but they will be open to coaching, because what coaching does, it takes a healthy person and it fine-tunes them to kind of not be healthy. And so that's kind of one of the differences between counseling and coaching. And so through coaching, we're looking for solutions. We're looking to help individuals set their goals, seek out their goals, identifying their strengths, to endorse those or complement those goals and strengths, and then help them identify the gap between where they are and where they're wanting to be. And again, this is a little different than a lot of times in ministry. What we do is we try to kind of cookie cutter people through discipleship processes or cookie cutter them through some sort of leadership training. With coaching, it gives us the ability to create a little bit more customization and a little bit more personal attention. Even if we're doing group coaching, we're still able to do kind of that personalization of it. And so the one thing to remember is that coaching is not about confronting in order to force a solution. And I don't know about for you guys, I know for me in my ministry, most of you guys know me well enough, like I'm a problem solver. So you come to me with a problem, tell me what your problem is, and I'm going to tell you exactly how you need to fix it or what you need to do. And so that's kind of my default is let me force a solution rather than discover a solution. And so coaching is not about confronting and pushing people. That's a lot of times when we think about coaching, we think about I think of my football coaches all the time, and those guys were tough and they pushed and they yelled at me and they told me to do it better or else. And so that's really not what coaching is. Maybe sports coaching is, but in the context we're talking about, that's not really what we're looking for. Coaching is not forcing some sort of solution. Coaching is really driven by the individual, which again, for us in ministry, that can be a little difficult because we're used to be the ones driving things forward. But in coaching, we allow the individual to drive it forward. We allow them to embrace their solutions when it comes from themselves. So imagine a coach, imagine you're walking alongside someone and you're walking down a path. And you're in the woods and you're following this trail. What a coach does, a coach points to the things that pay attention to or to consider or to look at or to take in or to think about. A coach doesn't tell them which direction they're supposed to go. And as pastors and ministers, a lot of times what we do is we tell them which direction they should go. Coaching doesn't do that. Coaching just says, hey, look at this, or hey, consider this, or what do you think about this? That's the difference between a coaching approach and just advising and telling. And what that does is it allows the individual to discover the solution on their own, and that creates higher buy-in on their end. When they have buy-in and when they come up with their own solutions, they're more apt to follow through and make those solutions work for them, rather than, hey, that's what my pastor told me to do, so I'm just trying it out and seeing what's going to happen. And then when it doesn't work, then they're like, well, that's on him, it's not on me. Through the coach approach, it allows them to not only come up with their own solutions, but then also take responsibility for the success and failure of those solutions. And when they make their own decisions based on their own solutions, that's why we have such an increase in confidence level in individuals who go through the coach approach, is because when they make their own decisions and they see successes, they're more apt to say, oh, okay, I can do this, because they came up with the solutions on their own so far.
So how do you find that balance between, because obviously like in ministry, you have an end goal. So like you have a leadership team, but you're kind of the one who's like, hey, this is where we're going. So how do you find that balance between you want them kind of in your line of vision and you want to, like, I guess, lead them in that direction, but then still coach them in a way where it's their thing and their idea and their, like, does that make sense? Like, how do you, like, what if they come to you and they're coming up with their own solutions, but they don't, but maybe their solutions aren't the best. Like, if that makes sense, like, know what I mean? And so like you as a leader, like, know a better way or a different way or something, like you said, try to avoid like problem solving a little bit. But then how do you, I guess, balance that?
So there's a couple different pieces to that. So the first one is, so if you're talking about of a leadership position, well, with a leadership position, there's clearly like, here are the objectives we need you to accomplish, and here are the responsibilities I need you to do, and here's kind of the empowering areas of responsibility you have. You can do whatever you want. In the responsibilities that we've given you to do, happening there, that's where leadership happens. That's where I'm telling you, this is what we need you to do, and I'll help you problem solve on how to do that better. If it's, I've empowered you in this area to do whatever it is you want to do, here are the outcomes that we're looking for. So then, let's just say your responsibility is to throw a 4th of July event that reaches, people that are, like for us here at church, we have the fireworks display is like not even a block and a half away from us. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people that come into the parking lot. So let's just say we're going to do an event on that night. And, Bob, it's your responsibility to put together an event that, engages those people that are in our parking lot and provides them with refreshments, whatever. Those are the objectives. Mm-hmm. He's got everything going. He's doing it all. But you just see, like, there's problems. There's things that he didn't think through, whatever. You've empowered him. And so this is a time where you coach him through it. Say, okay, what could you have done differently? How could you have done this different? What did you see? Well, how could you have addressed those problems? Just rather than so you're coaching them and asking them questions and allowing them to process through it. So as leaders, we have to know which side is it that I'm telling you what to do and you just need to do it, and what side are we empowering and then need to coach them through. And really empower people to do things. We empower our leaders to do stuff. When it doesn't go right, what we do is we don't coach them through it. We jump in and now we lead it.
Yeah.
Which then takes away their empowerment, takes away their responsibility, and takes away their ability really to grow as leaders themselves. And so,
yeah.
And then there's also the other side of just personal growth and personal development. And probably the one of the most difficult lessons I've had to learn, especially being an OSL, was to make stupid decisions and deal with the consequences. Because as leaders, we always want to save people from those, or we want to help them, or we want to say, hey, that road you're going down is disastrous. Don't go that way. But the problem is most of the time people have to learn it the hard way, and they're not going to listen to you. And so all you do is end up being the naysayer, that's not encouraging and loving and all the, touchy-feely stuff they want you to be. As a coach, you can be all that. You can say, okay, consider these things, or maybe think through this, but you let them make that decision and walk down that path. No, sometimes it does work out, and sometimes it is fine, and it's not what you think it'll be. But the more life experience, the more you just learn that, you have to let them go down that path and make those decisions. It's not easy, but.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Can you hear
Yes,
me?
we can now.
Um, yeah, so ditto with all those. I find myself just, I'll throw this out there for discussion's sake. Almost all of my ministry, this is my, I guess, my first official appointment where basically I'm paid to do what I do. Everything else has been volunteer. And I just say that just to kind of set up the question. So where I've always been is, I think I've said before, as an armor bearer, kind of in that inner circle with the pastor, and those some of those discussions, and certainly through a bummer situation in our church in Iowa, learned actually myself the hard way that you just have to let leaders, uh, leaders or those in leadership, um, feel the consequences of their decisions. And what I want to mention though is often in that position, we're often certainly we can lead and or coach down, and the same is true as you lead and coach or influence up as well.
Yeah.
And that is very much the position that I'm in here. Our local church here that we're under, the large Dutch church, has kind of an issue with, I call them castles or silos in leadership. And just to explain that, in case, is just like a castle is like, oh, this is my ministry and I'm building my ministry and it feeds me and it has no greater sense or purpose to the bigger church vision or where the church is headed, or maybe even just something small where the pastor wants it to go. So I've attempted to lead, or not lead, but attempted to encourage or coach upward, and I've found that to be a difficult task. It's the situation I'm in is because the pastor is new within the last year, and so the two previous pastors are very well known, legendary type of guys, actually, and so he feels like he has big shoes to fill and a lot of pressure there, and so he's really eager to prove himself, and so that a lot of times puts up walls from, surprisingly, walls from being coached. And so we really are kind of in that process of like, hey, I'm looking around the room going, okay, well, there's no one else sitting here like myself who sees the unbalance, who sees the dysfunction, and there's, everyone understands dysfunction, but the imbalance and the disjointedness. And so I've tried to jump in myself and coach up, but I found it very difficult just because of those. There's walls sometimes, I guess what I'm asking, what my question would be is maybe more specifically for Brandon, because you've been in those positions, or maybe throw it around the table of just advice for coaching upward. Obviously it takes a great deal, and so far it just takes a great deal of humility and just in my position and just working hard, showing up and painting walls, sometimes just doing some grunt work, and then being a part of the conversations. But wanted to hear from you guys, thoughts from the different leaders that you guys are under.
Well, I'll let the two of you respond if you have anything, and then I'll jump in.
I mean, so are you kind of asking like how do you coach to someone who's above you, or are you asking like, I guess.
Let me ask it this way. In influencing, you influence up and you influence down. Yeah. Let's use the word influence. Leadership is influence, or coaching. Yeah. Let's say it that way. When you're influencing upward or you're coaching upward, what has been the best? Where have you found success? Hinge points or leverage points of like, oh yeah, that really makes sense.
Yeah, I typically what I've found is I like to find like their sweet spot a little bit of like what, because I mean with working with people you kind of learn like okay, like you said, you know, with your current situation they're filling really big shoes, and so that's you can kind of see that as almost like a sore spot for them. So like one way to not approach that I would say is to be like, well, so and so used to blank 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 blank, because then they're going to automatically do that comparison thing. And so what I would do is kind of I typically like to call out when they do things well, like and then so not every conversation we're having is like a critique, but it's sort of like whenever I get that chance to point out like, hey, service went great on Sunday, like that was really well, or like, hey, this sermon series we're in, I like that altar time was fantastic. Like when I can point out those wins, then when I come across a critique or something where like that coaching side, like Brandon was talking about, of okay, you know, listening to what they're thinking, and then they kind of are like, well, what should I do? And then you have that moment where you can coach and coach up, then it kind of gives you a little bit more stock because they know you're not criticizing, you're not critiquing, but you're just saying, hey, like, because you've called out the good stuff already, and they know that, okay, they know that I'm qualified, they know that I have like these good shining parts, but then at the same time, hey, I'm just trying to help you and coach you. Maybe like Brandon said, it's not like that therapy, but it's more of that fine tuning. Like, not that what you're doing is bad, but like, let's get 100% out of what we're trying to accomplish here, as opposed to the 80% that we're getting right now. Like, how can we get that extra 20% and kind of drive that up? And so what I would do is, you know, even if it's small things like, hey, you know, it was really great how you were ministering to that person. I saw that. Or like, hey, you know, maybe you are like doing that grunt work and painting walls. Like, hey, I really appreciate you helping out painting this room or whatever. But when you call out like those good moments, then when you kind of come across those moments where you can coach, I think that they're going to be more likely to accept it, because it's not just, hey, like, here's another thing you can fix. Here's another thing you can fix. Here's another thing you can fix.
Yep. David, do you have anything to add?
Well, my situations have been more unique. I think where I'm at now, I'm a lot less experienced than anybody else. So typically my insight is, I don't know, not super well received. Just depends on the situation. But previously, I worked for my dad. Even before that, was a volunteer under him for a decade. And a lot of times with him, you know, obviously we're family, so it was a lot easier to just shoot straight. And, you know, I just learned that we had to get to a point where we were like, where ministry didn't have the emotions of personal relationship. I mean, it did, but we had to draw a line and say, hey, this is ministry, and I'm angry about this, but I am wearing my church hat. You know, and his was the same, but for me to him, it had to be like that just because we were related. And I think a lot of times in the church world, you end up with people who are family, and so understanding that has been nice, because I think I've probably relayed that on to other people who work with family as well. So, but yeah, as far as coaching or influencing the people above me, I'm normally just pretty sneaky about it.
Well, really, you have to start with trust. And I think what both the guys said is very true. You know, I think for me, because I've always been here position, and so I always find myself leading up or coaching up a lot. Especially when I don't know for Josh if this is you, but the detail guy, the system guy, the process guy. So, you know, I can assess the situation relatively quickly and see the problems way before the visionary guy does. And so, so I've had to learn how to establish trust early on manage that level of trust. The old adage, like, watch the change in your pocket, kind of that whole thing is you find the times when you can, like Waz was saying, you encourage as often as possible. You find ways to champion ideas, champion his thoughts, whatever the case is. Build that change in your pocket so that you can strategically choose the right moments to put a very well crafted question in place that will then cause thoughts down a particular road that you need them to go down. And a lot of it's trust. A lot of it's strategically wording your questions and placing them in the right places. It is just being there in the right times. For me, a lot of the pastors that I worked under, moments of vulnerability where they're exhausted or they're frustrated or they're overwhelmed, or sometimes even they feel like they're alone. And I just position myself in those moments so that when they just start talking, I'm there to listen. I'm there to just be there as a support for them. And honestly, those moments actually create greater trust because I'm not telling them what they should do. I'm not positioning myself in opposition. I'm supporting them in, maybe one of the more difficult times for them. And so I think for you, Josh, I think part of it's because you're still new, you're still establishing trust. And if you're fighting against, insecurity in your lead, you have to find a way that even if he's insecure with everyone else, find a way to allow him to be at you and trust you. And quite honestly, I think for you, it's probably going to be easier for him because you don't come in with all history and baggage of this church or who these other people were or anything like that. Like, you're taking him at face value. And so if he can see that and he can see your appreciation for him without all the baggage that other people carry around, then he gravitate towards you just because of that. Does that all make sense?
Good. Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Good advice. Thank you.
Okay. So go through a couple more things. What is a coach and what is not a coach? So what is a coach? A coach is a listener. A coach is a question architect, and a coach is an ongoing partner. So we've already talked about listening, huge part of coaching. And part of that's not just listening to the words being said, but listening to the words not being said, learning how to read between the lines, learning how to identify when somebody is not saying something. And sometimes, as coaches, we recognize it, and then we have to assess, do I push and do I try to get in there, or do I just let it go? File it away for another time. I think there's something that's not being said. And then the other part is, do I leave it there or do I push into it? And so some of that is just experience. You learn when to and when not to. A question architect piece, learning how to craft really good questions. And in order to be a question architect, you naturally have to be curious. And so if you find that you're not a curious person, then find ways to be curious about everything. I know sometimes it gets me in trouble because people will say things or whatever, and I'll just say why, and they'll take it as me being aggressive or, adversarial or whatever. I'm not. I'm just literally, I want to understand everything I can. And so when something doesn't make sense, I'll ask, why? Why is that? Because I want to understand the why. And so the more curious you are, then when somebody is talking and they say something that's like, oh, I haven't thought about that, or that's new to me, or whatever, curious, you're going to miss that and it's going to go by. But if you're a curious person, you're going to be like, hey, so explain that to me, or explain this to me, or when you said that, what did you mean? Because that will create more avenues of clarity that they'll talk through more. And so being curious, being progressive with your questions and not linear. So first of all, don't use yes, no questions, because that doesn't move the conversation forward. Yes, no questions are really useless, other than for clarification. If you need clarification, you can ask a yes, no question. But for the most part, you don't do that. Having progressive questions is having a question that builds off the last question. So, if I ask question A and then I get a response, I don't want to repertoire and pull that in, because it doesn't have any connection with question A. You want to go to question B. So question A leads them, you take the response, then you build question B off of the response or somehow related to question A. Make it progressive. Allow the conversation to actually move down a track towards something. Because again, remember, coaching is all about solution orientation. And so when you have a progression of questions, you're moving towards a solution. You may not know what the solution is, but you're at least moving towards something rather than just randomly wandering around in a conversation. You'll sit down for 2 hours and really have not accomplished anything. And so be progressive, not linear. Trust to be established, and we've talked about that. What that allows you to do, though, it gives you permission then to speak into their life later on. And even going back to look at your question earlier, Josh, part of that is we use the coaching method to build trust, to answer specific questions, strategic questions to get them thinking. But in our roles, always with our leads, we always at some point step into an advisory role. They're always going to come back and say, okay, well, what do you think? And that's when the coaching approach has worked, because now they're asking for your input. And that's where you give them what you think. And so allow your coach approach to create that permission asking, so when they actually do come and ask your input. Use open-ended questions. So the who, what, why, where, when, all of those things, how. Use those types of questions because that will allow get them talking more than just one-word answers. And so use open-ended questions. And then use this or that questions. I use this or that questions a lot of time to clarify. Not necessarily that I'm confused about what they're saying, but maybe because what they're saying is not specific or definitive enough. And so when they're telling me something, I'll say, so do you mean this or that? Do you mean, are you wanting to move to Spain, or are you wanting to move to Mexico? And it may not be either one, but then they'll say, well, that's not really what I mean. Or well, I don't really want to move to either one. I actually want to move to Florida. Okay, well, that wasn't on my radar at all. So when you ask this or that questions, it allows for clarification, not only for you, but also for them, because they then have to correct you and verbalize what they're actually thinking, which helps them then have clarity in their own mind of what they're saying. And then ongoing partner, coaching is not a one-shot deal. As consultants, we can sit down and sit down with somebody one time, give them advice, and walk away and just kind of let them do their thing. Being a coach is ongoing. It's a process, even like we were talking about with the situation with Josh. Like, you're investing time and energy into it. It's going to take time. You're establishing trust. You don't have the expertise necessarily to just walk in, give the answers, and walk out. Coaching is a process, and so we have to, as coaches, we have to think it, approach it that way. So, and then what is a coach not? Like I just said, a coach is not an expert. Now, it doesn't mean you can't be an expert, but it just means that when you put a coach hat on, you're not approaching the situation as the expert. What I've found is when I don't know anything about what we're talking about, I'm a lot better coach. So when I'm coaching people through ministry stuff, it's a lot harder, because I can tell you what you need to do. I can give you the advice. I can walk you through whatever. If you're coming to me and you're asking about running your business of horse grooming, I don't know anything about that. I'm a better coach than if you're a minister and asking for direction on how to do ministry. So a coach is not the expert. Coach is also not the answer. And in ministry, we run into this a lot. In ministry, we look, we run into where people want to attach themselves to us. They want us to be their personal messiahs. They want us to kind of be the answer to their problems. And when we do coaching right, we don't allow ourselves to be that, because we put the responsibility and the onus back on them, that they find their own solutions and they follow through. And it creates boundaries in a natural way than like this weird, we've all been there where, wanting to, ask us questions about whatever, and she keeps asking us the same questions, and really she just wants to be around us. We have to find some weird way to establish boundaries. We can't do this. This is weird. You're weird with me. And so when you coach approach, that's naturally kind of taken care of, because we just put it back on them and they make their own decisions. And then like we talked about earlier, a coach is not an advisor or a counselor. We're not trained counselors. We're not, we aren't gifted in that direction. We haven't to the education. Too often when ministry leaders try to counsel, I think we actually, because we don't know what we're doing when it comes to counseling. So my general rule is if we're meeting about the same thing more than 3 times, you need to go see a professional counselor, because I'm not going to be able to help you. If I can't help you in 3 meetings, then I'm probably not going to be able to help you at all. And then again, we just don't tell people what to do. We don't advise them. When we put that coach hat on, we are asking questions and letting them come to their own solution. So for you guys then, as we've gone through this, can you see elements of coaching already in your ministry, or can you identify places in your ministry where you could insert coaching that would benefit you?
I mean, I think that the thing that I like that you just said was that it's kind of easier to coach when you're not like the expert, because I feel like that's my natural instinct, is kind of like how I said with the previous thing. Like, even when I'm coaching, my goal is to get them to do what I want them to do. and that's not always like the right answer. And so I think that even on our leadership team, one of the things that I feel like we really need to strengthen is the fact of what are people good at, and letting them be good at it and help them be good at it, as opposed to we have a need here, and so I need to teach you or lead you to be good at this, whether you're passionate about it or good at it or whatever, just because my ministry has a need that needs to be filled. And so just kind of that transition of, sitting down and talking about, okay, well, what are you passionate about? And then how can I, like I said earlier, get you from doing, whether it's like media or speaking or leading a small group or whatever it is, and you're at 80%, how can I get you from 80 to 100, as opposed to, hey, here's this need and you have no idea how to do it, but let me tell you how to do it. Right. And so I think just even in our leadership teams, kind of seeing that difference between filling a need and coaching people at what they're already good at to get them to do things better, and then figure out how that fits into our ministry, as opposed to trying to fit people into our ministry, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, no, that's good. And quite honestly, when we use coaching in our leadership development, we actually create better leaders.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the only real active instance of coaching currently would be with my nursery coordinator, because I really don't have a whole lot of experience at all in a nursery. I've held a baby for 2 months now. But she somewhat knows what to do. I mean, she has her background in toddlers and babies. So, but for the most part, it's really just been asking the right questions that kind of unlock her potential, and help her to just kind of expand her ideas of what that program looks like to what it could be. And again, like, I don't have a knowledge of that. I Google other church nursery programs for ideas, but that's about the extent. But it's mostly just asking the questions that will help her to kind of see where she's going, and that's really been the only instance of coaching. From a lot of my leaders, it's more about direction. At this point, at least, I think we're almost getting to a place where they look to me more. The trust is there, but at this point, it's just not. It hasn't really been there yet. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, in a situation like you are with if she already has a pretty good idea of what she's doing, and she's really just kind of fitting into the overall vision that you're providing, is it will allow you to allow them, it's hard to lead high level leaders when you're telling them what to do all the time. High level leaders don't want to be told what to do. They want to be empowered and left alone. And so coaching actually is a better format for leadership when it comes to leading high powered leaders. If you want high powered leaders to work for you, it's more beneficial for you than just telling people what to do. If you tell people what to do all the time and smile, high-level leaders don't want to be told what to do. I mean, all of us, if you're honest with yourself, what to do, you want to be told what the objectives are and left alone and allowed to just do it. And so high-level leaders won't be told what to do over a long period of time. And so coaching will always allow that to happen more naturally. So what do you guys think for you personally? What's the biggest obstacle to using coaching in your ministry?
Mine would probably be, because I think that, like, in theory, it's sort of like, I don't think that everyone's as motivated as we'd like them to be. And so, like, know what I mean? Like, so and I think that that's something that I'm realizing is, like, I almost need to treat my leaders a little bit differently. I mean, love them all the same, but, like, there are some leaders who are just a little bit more, like, when I went to camp, we actually had the speaker was the national youth director for Ireland. And so he said, like, he has different levels of leaders. Like, he personally, like, on a scale of 1 to 10 will, like, grade them basically and say, like, this is, like, their capacity. And we're always trying to get them, like, to the next level, but, like, we also have to be honest with where they're at. And then he's also somewhat open with them on that end. He's like, some people, like, are the kind of leaders where, like, they're going to serve in your youth group once a month, and that's their, like, level of commitment. But they're going to be there once a month all the time. And then there are other ones who's like, they can lead a small group on an offsite location. And so I think my thing is just sort of the hurdle of wanting everyone to be that person who can lead a small group, like, with no, like, where I can just kind of, hey, here's the vision, and then they take it and they run with it, and realize, like, there are some people where, like, just showing up to attend, like, you know what I mean? Like, just be a warm body in the room and participate is a stretch for them. And so I guess, like, that's one of my big things, is just that balance of not everyone is that, like you said, high capacity leader, that some people are just sort of like, I'm just kind of here to be here. Like, I know it's good to help and serve, and so I guess that's what I'm doing. So kind of finding that balance with people.
Well, and that's actually a good point when we're talking about, generation development in our churches, because if you look at, the Industrial Revolution and World War II and all of that, we have a pretty solid modern mentality when it comes to leadership, where you just kind of create your environments. This is what it takes to be a youth leader in a youth group. This is what it takes to be a life group leader. And if you want to be that, then you be it based on these qualifications. And that's worked, for the last, 50 years. But we're coming into a point where now, as millennials, or, you guys are in there, I'm in there, all kind of that's in our churches, that's in, in the workplace. And what we're seeing is that there has to be more customization. We have to take people where they are initially. And then, like you're saying, was moving them, down the path. So you can't just create, here are the qualifications. If you can't meet them, then you can't do it. Mm-hmm. We essentially have to take people where they are and then say, okay, you're willing to give me once a month. Well, in the next year, I would like to see you do twice a month or something like that. You find a way to push them one step farther. Cultures change, people change. And quite honestly, the way adults now think in their 20s and 30s, it just doesn't work with that customize or with that, cookie cutter, do it this way. Everybody's got to do it the same way. So, yeah. With coaching, it allows you specifically on an individual and what they need to do to get to the next step.
Yeah, because that's the thing, is I feel like a lot of ministry I've been in has kind of been blank. Like you said, here are the requirements and run with it. But then, I've realized, like, we have a guy, his name is Mickey. He wants to go into ministry. He's not really sure what yet. But, 22-year-old guy, loves God, passionate, will serve, stack chairs, do whatever you need him to do. But he's not really sure, do I want to be a youth pastor? Do I want to be a, associate, a lead pastor? He doesn't know what he wants to do yet. And so he just wants to serve. And so part of me is sort of like this, where, I'm expecting a 1-year commitment and you to be here every Wednesday and lead a small group and all that. And he's like, I don't even know if I like students. like, you know what I mean? And so I think that, but you know what I mean? And so to have that whole blanket thing, and like you said, I think it's wise to do the more, okay, coach them on a one-on-one sort of basis. Like, yeah, you have basic standards, like, okay, these are the non-negotiables. But then at the same time, like, not say, okay, like if someone comes to me and they say, I really want to serve, but, you know, I'm in school and I'm working and, you know, being here every single week is just not super realistic. And so just saying, okay, well, you can't lead, then, okay, well, what can you do? Okay, well, this is, but then hold them to that. And so.
Yep, that's good. It creates a little more work on our end. But again,
yeah,
we'd rather have lots of volunteers at varying degrees than a handful of really committed volunteers. Thoughts? We're kind of coming to the end. All right. We'll wrap it up. So I hope that this kind of clarifies for you what coaching is, and even as you guys walk away from this, you can kind of think through how to use coaching, how to implement it. And obviously, if you have any more questions on, you know, how you can utilize coaching for your own ministries, you know, you can let me know. Be happy to help. So, because it's kind of become one of the things for me over the last few years that I'm like, okay, just need to get this. As ministry leaders, this is kind of the key to ministry moving forward, especially, as I said, with millennials kind of becoming the predominant group in our churches and those types of things. Like, we need to be able to coach people more than just tell them what to do. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, you guys all going to be here next week?
Sure.
Oh, yes. You know what?
Are you going to be here next week?
I won't be here next week. Nation.
Oh, lame.
Man. Not doing so well, huh? Well, yeah. I think when we started this, second week in July, and then too many things got put him away. So maybe Thursday wasn't the best idea.
Well, Thursday in theory is like my most free day, but the problem is, like, because it's my most free day, that's where I throw the most stuff at it. Because like Tuesday and Wednesday, like, always have stuff, and so
yeah. Well, and what I'm finding too is like all the webinars that I attend are generally Thursday and Friday.
Yeah.
Reason those are the days that most people are doing webinars, and so yeah, it's a good choice, but yeah, I need to figure stuff out. So yeah, so next week I'll be in Chicago celebrating my 10-year anniversary. So
okay.
So
fair enough.
We will pick it up.
Cool.
We will pick it up again.
Travel safe.
What's that? Thank you. I will. We will. We're gonna leave the kids with my mom, and we're gonna sleep for like 4 days. So we're gonna go to Chicago and sleep.
Sounds great.
Maybe we'll watch a movie too.
Always a good idea.
All righty, guys. Well, thanks for being here. Thanks for being on.
Great.
Please feel free to let me know.
All right. Sounds good.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Josh, see us.
All right. See ya. Bye.
See you guys.